Yeah.
Okay, so you guys know me. I'm your ESL teacher, obviously. But instead of English this time, we're going to be learning about some science.
So ESS.
ESS.
English second science.
English second science. Yes, you're absolutely right. Okay, so before we get started on our lesson, we're going to learn the objectives. Do you guys know what objectives are?
No.
Okay, so objectives, you might see them on when you're in here with your teacher, you might see them on the board and they tell you like what you're going to learn about. Like that one says, I can review for my geometry test, right? So I'm going to talk about the objectives with you guys for this lesson. So we have our main objective and let's read it together. You ready? Everybody look at right here. Look at this one. I can identify. What does that word identify mean?
It means like discover something even deeper, or like getting into something you never seen.
Yeah, like finding something. Good. That's a really good definition. Okay, so let's start again. I can identify how to measure, test, and write down physical properties. Okay, so physical properties are things that you can see, or things that you can test. So like my physical property is I have brown hair, right? And I'm 5'2". Those are things that I can measure, right?
Do you know what's
5
feet?
Yeah.
I'm 4 feet.
Well, I'm 5'2".
Okay, then I'm very close to it.
Yeah, it's not hard.
But okay. Mine's more.
So I can identify how to measure, test, and write down physical properties. Everybody put your finger on of matter, including temperature, mass, and magnetism. So we're going to talk about those words temperature, mass, and magnetism. We're also going to talk about this word matter and what that means. And so the physical properties are temperature, mass, and magnetism. Those are all things that we can measure. We can measure the temperature. We can measure the mass. That's like how heavy something is. And then we can measure if it's magnetic or not. Magnetic means
what
like,
is
it a magnet? I don't know.
You know what I want to do once we finish ESL and once they're coming?
Yeah.
I want to start a dance in front of the classroom so they can go like, what the heck are you doing?
All right, maybe next time. All right, so now we're going to talk about our language objectives. So
it's always like that.
Our language objectives are like how we use our language, right? Because everybody in the circle speaks a language other than English. So we're going to talk about what things I'm looking for and what are my expectations for your language, okay? So language is listening, speaking, reading, and writing, right? So let's go over our language objectives. I'm gonna read these objectives. So it says I can preview the chapter heading to find the topic, which is classifying matter. So in just a little bit, we're going to look at it's not a textbook, but we're going to look at a passage about classifying matter, and we're going to preview the chapter. So we're going to kind of look through it and see what it's going to be about.
Well, it keeps on doing that.
Yeah.
I know. Wow.
So I can predict what I will learn about classifying matter by
turning the heading
into a question. So we're going to look at the heading, and we're going to talk about what that heading is. So remember, a heading is like a little title, right?
So the heading is a head?
Kind of. Yeah. So you have like the title, and then underneath it is going to be the heading. And it's gonna label the different parts of the text that we're gonna read later.
So a heading is really just like a title or the beginning of a story, or
it's like the title of a section,
or like the head part, the first part of it.
So we're gonna talk about how we can preview that, and then we're going to I can read about how matter is classified in physical properties such as mass, temperature, and magnetism. So we're gonna read it to find those things out. And then I can describe, that means like you're going to talk using the vocabulary. So we're about to go over the vocabulary in just a second. That's why you have those cards.
Write them on these
Yusuf, hold on.
note cards?
So I can describe using the vocabulary in the text with a partner what tools we use to measure different things. So we're going to talk about the vocabulary, and that's why we have those index cards. And then the last one, I can explain and record why certain tools are the right ones to measure certain physical properties compared to others. So we're going to talk about like why you would use a thermometer to measure temperature and maybe use a scale for the mass. You wouldn't use a scale to measure temperature, and you wouldn't use a
Use a temperature to measure a scale.
right, a thermometer to measure. Yeah, exactly. Okay, does that make sense to everybody?
Yes.
Okay, so let's go. Does anybody have any questions before I move on about what you're gonna do? Yes.
My question is that what day are we gonna do the dance in front of the classroom?
We're not doing it right now.
Anthony,
Okay.
I see the eraser. I'm gonna give it back.
Okay.
Just gotta see it.
So before we start, I want you to think, pair, share. So you're gonna think about it for a second. Then you're gonna talk to the person next to you. What do you already know about matter, or what matter is? So you might not know, but the other person might know. So think about it for a second. I'm gonna give you a couple seconds to think about it.
We write it on the
No, I want you to think about it in your head. Now turn to the person next to you and talk. What do you already know about matter? So Mustafa, you're going to talk to Oliver, and Yusuf, and you're going to talk to Anthony.
What I know about matter is it could be matter is everywhere. It's in the human body. It's in air. It's everywhere. It's even kind of like
So
in
Mustafa,
water.
make sure
You
you're talking
drink
to Oliver.
it, you eat it,
You're listening. That means you're looking at him.
and also
Anything
matter is different than mass.
Class.
Yes, yes.
So Oliver, I heard you like looking at the board. So you already know what is matter, or what did you see out there?
air balloons.
Okay.
Hot air balloons.
Okay. Good. Mustafa, do you know anything about? Have a seat, Yusuf. Do you know anything about matter?
Kind of.
Kind of. What do you know?
It's like space.
Okay, it's anything that takes up space. That's good. Yes. No.
Everything.
Okay, it makes up everything. Good. Anthony, do you know anything about?
Should go like that. Everything. You can see it.
Okay, it's things that you can see. Yes.
What I know about matter is it's anything that has mass and takes up space.
Oh, that's an excellent definition. It's anything that has mass and takes up space. So that's kind of what Oliver said. All right, so matter is all around us, and it makes up everything in our world. So it's just like what Yusuf and Oliver were saying. It's literally everywhere. You are made of matter. This desk is made of matter. The carpet's made of matter. Everything's made of matter. And there's certain properties that we use to describe matter. So there's certain, like we talked about, like temperature and mass and magnetism. We use those things to describe all the things in our world. So, so like one of the properties is density, and that's like how thick something is.
So
Okay.
matter looks
So
like
density-
everything?
Yeah, like you're made of matter. I'm made of matter.
So
Your fingernails are made of matter.
So
The air is made of matter.
density means anything that's thick or thin.
Kind of, yeah. Okay, so we're gonna watch a YouTube video real quick, and it's gonna explain matter a little bit more. So while we're listening to the video, I need everybody on the bottom, so I'm gonna turn it around.
Yes, ma'am.
And then,
Wow.
okay.
I thought that was
I'm Dr. Jeff Vinegar, and today we'll explore the science behind the properties of matter.
Oh, I didn't know. Dr. John.
Properties
One
of
of
the
the gas
machine gun.
canisters is sulfur hexafluoride. The other is helium. But we don't know which is which.
Let's test them.
I know that helium is what they use to make party balloons from. That's right, Izzy. Helium is a gas that's less dense than air, so it rises up. How something rises or sinks is related to a property of matter called density.
Helium is less dense than air, so it should float. And sulfur hexafluoride is more dense, so it should sink.
Let's fill these two balloons with the gases and compare their density. Three, two, one.
Wow.
The pink balloon's more dense, so it must be the sulfur hexafluoride. Great! Let's put some sulfur hexafluoride into the tank over here. Whoa!
sulfur hexafluoride gets in the boat?
That doesn't even look like water. It's not. It's not supposed to.
Sulfur hexafluoride is heavier than air, so pouring it into our little boat makes it heavy enough to sink.
I know, but how did the helium get
You
out
want
of
to watch
the
this
tank?
full episode and more? Tell your teacher to sign up at GenerationGenius.com.
Okay.
We cover all science topics in grades 3 to 5.
That's all about matter?
Well, what property of matter were they measuring?
Oh.
What property of matter were they measuring?
Helium?
No. What was the thing they were testing?
Matter.
Huh? No. But what property of matter?
Mass.
Not mass.
Matter?
They were
Density.
density. And density is whether something
Floats or sinks?
floats or sinks. So that's why they were doing the experiment in the tank. So they put all of that chemical in there and it was heavier than air, so it made it sink. And then when they put helium in it, it made it rise, right? So the property of matter that they were measuring was
The property of matter, what they were measuring
Mustafa,
was
what was the property of matter they were measuring? Whether something
goes up or down.
or sinks or floats, and that was called
Density.
density. Good. So there's all kinds of properties of matter. So, but the ones we're going to be focusing on are
Is density.
nope, not density. They were focusing on density. We're going to talk about mass, temperature, and magnetism. So whether something's magnetic, what's the mass of it, and then what the temperature of it is. Yes.
I
Uh-huh.
still don't understand how the what was it? The thing that made it float get out. How didn't it not get out the tank?
Say your question again.
How didn't that thing they put in it, that air thing, I forgot its name, come out?
That
How
gas?
didn't it come out?
Because it doesn't go like immediately. Like, it's kind of like if you're hot in your house and you turn the air conditioner on to cool it down, it's not immediately, all that hot air is not immediately going to go away. It kind of takes time. Or like if somebody cooks something really good and then they're not cooking it anymore, that air, that scent is kind of stays in the kitchen for a while, right? And then it finally kind of goes away. So that air doesn't like immediately go away. It kind of sits there for a second.
And also, when they did the thing, it seemed like water. How'd they get it out into that thing?
I'm going to save your question for after this, okay? Because it's a really good question. But while we're on this topic, I want to talk about, we're going to talk about vocabulary words. So we're going to go over the word temperature. Okay, so mirror words.
Real words.
Temperature
Temperature.
is how hot
It's how hot
or cold
or cold
something is.
something is.
Temperature
Temperature.
is how hot
It's
How hot
or cold
or cold
something is.
something is.
How hot,
How hot,
how cold
how cold
something is.
something is.
Temperature.
Temperature.
Teach.
okay.
Okay.
Temperature. Something
Temperature. How hot or cold something is.
Class.
Yes.
Class.
Yes.
Okay, we're almost out of time. So I want us to write temperature. Write the word temperature on your card, and this is how you spell it. Temperature. 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 And then on the other side, I want you to draw a picture that's going to help you remember what temperature means. So remember, temperature is how hot or cold something is.
Can I do a thermometer?
Huh?
Like a thermometer?
Yeah, you can. And then you're going to draw it on the other side. Don't write the definition. On the other side, I want you to draw a picture that reminds you of temperature. So Anthony came up with the idea of doing a thermometer. Or maybe you could do flames or like a snow flake.
I'm gonna make it like hot and cold.
Okay.
Are you gonna make like a whole thing where it shows like snow and then it shows fire?
Okay, I'm going to give you 20 seconds to finish your picture.
20 minutes for 1 minute.
So when is it done?
All right, guys. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to the next vocabulary word.